You wake in your cold stone chamber, the chill seeping through the thick walls, and already a familiar dread settles in your stomach. Not the dread of hard labor, not the fear of hunger, but something far more intimate and humiliating, the knowledge that today, like every day for the rest of your medieval life, you must face a choice that would break most modern people. How to clean yourself after relieving your bowels without dignity, without privacy, and without any of the basic comforts that define human civilization. The medieval bathroom, if it can even be called that, was a theater of daily degradation where your most private moments became public humiliation. For the vast majority of people, there was no private room, no flushing toilet, no soft paper to wipe with. Instead, you might find yourself heading to a guard robe, a small chamber with a hole in the floor leading to a pit below, often reeking with the stench of waste that hadn't been cleaned for days or weeks, the smell rising through stone corridors like a toxic fog that invaded every breath you took. You think about the modern world, where privacy is expected and basic hygiene is a given, where the worst bathroom experience might be a dirty public restroom that you can leave and never think about again. Here, this nightmare is your daily reality, your permanent condition, your inescapable fate. The higher classes had their garderobes, but even these were little more than holes over cesspits, architectural monuments to human waste that reminded you constantly of your own biological shame. When the moment of truth arrives and you must clean yourself, the options before you are a catalogue of medieval torture. The poor used whatever nature provided, leaves that might be poisonous, hay that scratched and cut, straw that left splinters in the most sensitive places, or moss that was soft but crawling with insects and parasites. Others resorted to shells that could slice flesh like razors, or broken ceramics that required the skill of a surgeon to avoid turning a basic human need into a medical emergency. And if none of these instruments of torture were available, you faced the ultimate degradation, using your left hand, a choice that would forever mark you in social interactions, creating a taboo so powerful it still exists in cultures around the world today. The nobility and monks had access to linen cloths, washed and reused, but even this supposed luxury came with its own special hell, the persistent odors that had to be masked with herbs and perfumes, the knowledge that you were cleaning yourself with fabric that had cleaned countless others before you. You realized that this daily ritual wasn't just about physical necessity. It was a test of endurance that defined medieval existence, a reminder that in this world, even your most basic human needs were sources of pain, humiliation, and constant struggle for survival. Every trip to relieve yourself became a negotiation with suffering, a choice between different forms of degradation, a daily proof that dignity was a luxury few could afford. But if you think the physical challenge of cleaning yourself was the worst part of medieval bathroom culture, wait until you discover the communal nightmare that awaited those who had to share their most intimate moments with complete strangers. You approach the communal latrine, your stomach churning not just from the need to relieve yourself, but from the knowledge of what awaits you. The air is thick with the stench of human waste, urine, and the sickly, sweet smell of decay that clings to everything in this place. Before you, mounted on the wall like some medieval instrument of torture, hangs the Tersorium, a sponge tied to a wooden stick, soaked in what the Romans optimistically called cleaning solution, but which is really just vinegar, salt water, and the accumulated filth of everyone who used it before you. The sponge is dark with stains you don't want to identify, wet with substances that make your skin crawl just thinking about them. This single piece of sea sponge has been shared by dozens, perhaps hundreds of people today alone. You watch as the person before you finishes their business, uses the Tersorium with mechanical resignation, and places it back in the communal bucket of cleaning solution. The water is brown, chunky with debris, and you realize with horror that this is your only option for cleaning yourself. You think about the modern world, where the idea of sharing toilet paper with a stranger would be unthinkable, where even public restrooms provide individual supplies and privacy. Here, privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist, and hygiene is a communal nightmare that binds everyone together in shared degradation. The Tersorium represents the ultimate contradiction of medieval life, a tool designed for cleanliness that spreads more disease than it prevents. As you reach for the sponge, you can't help but wonder about the diseases it carries. Dysentery, parasitic worms, bacterial infections, all passed from person to person through this single, shared implement. Medieval physicians had no understanding of bacteria or viruses, so they couldn't comprehend why people who used communal latrines died at such alarming rates. They attributed it to God's will, to moral failings, to anything except the obvious truth that sharing bodily waste is a recipe for epidemic disease. The wooden handle is smooth from countless hands, worn down by the desperate grip of people who had no choice but to use this medieval torture device. You notice that some users have tried to minimize contact by gripping the very end of the stick, but even that offers little protection from the contamination that coats every surface. The sponge itself is falling apart, pieces of it floating in the bucket like grotesque confetti, reminders of all the people who have used it before you. You realize that this daily ritual isn't just about physical necessity, it's about the systematic destruction of human dignity. Every time you use the Tersorium, you're reminded that your most private, intimate moments are public property, that your body's needs are subject to communal degradation, that even basic cleanliness requires you to share in the filth of strangers. It's a daily lesson in powerlessness, a constant reminder that in this world, even your most fundamental human needs are sources of humiliation and disease. The psychological impact is perhaps worse than the physical danger. You learn to suppress your gag reflex, to ignore the smell, to pretend that this is normal, acceptable, even necessary. You develop a kind of mental armor against the revulsion, but that armor comes at a cost, the gradual erosion of your standards, your expectations, your very sense of what human beings deserve in terms of basic dignity and cleanliness. But if you think the shared Tersorium represents the depths of medieval bathroom horror, wait until you discover what happened to those who couldn't afford even this communal luxury, and had to resort to broken ceramics that turned every trip to the latrine into a potential medical emergency. You stand at the edge of the garderobe, the cold stone floor chilling your bare feet through thin leather soles, and before you lies a collection that would horrify any modern person. Broken ceramics, shards of once, proud plates and bowls now repurposed as crude wiping tools. The jagged edges catch what little light filters through the narrow window, each fragment promising pain and potential injury with even the slightest misstep. This is your daily gamble with death, disguised as basic hygiene. The choice before you is grim beyond imagination. Use these razor-sharp fragments to clean yourself after relieving your bowels, knowing that one wrong angle could slice open tender flesh, or face the social death of using your left hand, a taboo so powerful it would mark you as unclean and dishonorable for the rest of your life. You pick up a shard, feeling its rough, uneven surface scrape against your fingertips, and steel yourself for the most delicate and dangerous task of your medieval day. Every movement requires the precision of a surgeon and the nerves of a warrior. One slip, one moment of inattention, and you risk cutting the most sensitive parts of your body, opening wounds that could fester and spread infection through your entire system. The ceramic feels cold and menacing in your hand, its broken edges sharp enough to slice through skin like a blade. Yet this is your only option for maintaining even the most basic level of cleanliness. You think about the modern world, where soft, multi-ply toilet paper is so common it's taken for granted, where the idea of using broken pottery for personal hygiene would be met with horror and immediate medical intervention. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, survival means adapting to whatever tools are available, no matter how dangerous, degrading, or potentially lethal they might be. The medical consequences of this daily ceramic roulette are severe and often fatal. Cuts and abrasions from pottery shards frequently became infected, leading to painful inflammations, abscesses, and septic conditions that could kill within days. Without proper medical knowledge, antiseptics, or even basic understanding of infection control, these seemingly minor injuries could easily turn into death sentences. Medieval physicians attributed such deaths to God's will or moral failings, never understanding that their cleaning methods were actually instruments of torture and disease. You watch others in your community navigate this same deadly ritual, their wounds hidden beneath layers of rough clothing. Their pain endured in stoic silence because complaining about basic bodily functions was seen as weakness or vanity. The risk of infection is compounded by the general filth that permeates every corner of medieval life, the lack of clean water, the presence of human waste in living spaces, and the complete absence of any understanding about bacteria or proper wound care. The psychological toll is perhaps even worse than the physical danger. You learn to approach this daily necessity with the same dread others might reserve for battle or execution. Your most private, intimate moments become exercises in terror, where the simple act of cleaning yourself could result in weeks of agony or a slow, painful death from infection. The ceramic gamble transforms a basic human need into a test of courage, skill, and pure luck. Yet despite the horrific dangers, this practice persists across medieval Europe, a testament to human endurance and the desperate adaptability of people forced to survive in impossible conditions. The daily gamble with broken ceramics becomes just one of countless trials that define medieval existence. A brutal reminder that dignity, safety, and even basic survival were luxuries few could afford. But if you think the ceramic gamble represents the depths of medieval bathroom horror, wait until you discover the wooden alternative that promised splinters in places where splinters should never go, and the ingenious ways people tried to make deadly tools slightly less likely to kill them. You reach for one of the smooth wooden sticks that lie scattered around the garderobe like instruments of medieval torture disguised as cleaning tools. The wood feels deceptively innocent in your hand, worn smooth by countless desperate users, polished by years of fearful gripping. But you know the truth that every medieval person learns through painful experience. Even the smoothest wood harbors tiny splinters eager to embed themselves in the most sensitive flesh imaginable. The preparation alone is an exercise in terror. You must examine each stick carefully, running your fingers along its surface to detect any obvious protrusions or rough patches that could turn your cleaning ritual into a medical emergency. But even the most careful inspection can't guarantee safety. Splinters can hide in the grain of the wood, invisible until they pierce your skin with the sharp precision of a needle, sending waves of agony through your body that make you question whether cleanliness is worth this daily torture. You think about the modern world where toilet paper is engineered for softness, designed to protect rather than harm, manufactured with the understanding that human dignity includes the right to clean yourself without risking injury. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, survival means accepting that even your most basic needs come with the constant threat of pain, infection, and potential death. From something as simple as a wooden splinter in the wrong place, the technique required is both art and science. You must apply enough pressure to achieve cleanliness while maintaining such delicate control that you don't drive splinters into tender flesh. Too gentle, and you remain filthy. Risking disease and social ostracism. Too aggressive, and you risk puncturing skin that has no protection against the bacteria and filth that permeate every corner of medieval life. It's a balance that requires the steady hands of a surgeon and the nerves of someone who knows that one mistake could mean weeks of agony. Or death from infection. The medical consequences are horrifying beyond modern comprehension. When splinters penetrate the delicate tissues around your most private areas, they carry with them all the bacteria and contamination of medieval life, human waste, animal filth, and countless other sources of infection that medieval medicine has no power to combat. Without antiseptics, antibiotics, or even basic understanding of infection control, a simple splinter becomes a potential death sentence, a slow, agonizing corruption that spreads through your body like poison. You watch the faces of others in your community as they perform this same daily ritual, and you see the grim determination of people who have learned to accept pain as the price of basic hygiene. Some bear the scars of past splinter injuries, raised welts, discolored patches of skin, or the telltale signs of infections that somehow didn't kill them but left permanent reminders of their daily gamble with wooden torture devices. The lucky ones have developed calluses on their fingers from years of careful wood examination, but even they can't eliminate the risk entirely. The psychological impact transforms your relationship with your own body and its needs. You learn to dread the natural call of your bowels. Not because of the waste itself, but because of the cleaning ritual that follows, a daily confrontation with pain, fear, and the constant possibility of injury. Your most private moments become exercises in courage, where the simple act of maintaining hygiene requires the same mental preparation others might reserve for battle or surgery. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this wooden nightmare is how quickly you adapt to it, how your standards of acceptable risk shift to accommodate the impossible reality of medieval life. What would horrify any modern person becomes routine, normal, even necessary. You develop techniques for minimizing splinter risk, learn to recognize the safest pieces of wood, and gradually accept that pain and injury are simply the price of being human in this brutal world. But if you think wooden splinters represent the depths of medieval bathroom degradation, wait until you discover the cultural curse that turns your own hand into a source of permanent social shame, a taboo so powerful it still shapes human behavior centuries later. You stand before the ultimate choice that has haunted humanity for centuries, a decision so fundamental it still shapes cultural taboos across the globe today. When all other options have failed, when there are no ceramics to gamble with, no wooden sticks to risk splinters, no moss or leaves within reach, you face the most degrading solution of all, using your own left hand to clean yourself after relieving your bowels. This isn't just about hygiene anymore. This is about choosing between physical necessity and social suicide. The moment you make this choice, you cross a line that can never be uncrossed. Your left hand becomes permanently contaminated in the eyes of medieval society, marked forever as the instrument of your most shameful bodily functions. From this day forward, you must remember never to eat with it, never to greet others with it, never to touch anything sacred or clean with the hand that has touched your own filth. The psychological burden of this permanent contamination weighs on your mind like a curse that follows you through every social interaction for the rest of your life. You think about the modern world, where hand sanitizer and soap can cleanse away any contamination, where the idea of a permanently dirty hand would seem absurd and superstitious. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, your choice to use your left hand for cleaning creates a social stigma so powerful that it transcends cultures, religions, and centuries. Even today, in many parts of the world, offering your left hand for a greeting or eating with it is considered deeply offensive, a taboo born from this exact medieval nightmare you're living through. The social consequences extend far beyond personal shame. You must now navigate every meal, every handshake, every blessing with the constant awareness that one slip, one moment of forgetfulness, could expose your secret to the entire community. You learn to eat awkwardly with only your right hand, to keep your left hand hidden beneath tables or behind your back, to develop an entirely new way of moving through the world that accommodates this invisible contamination. The irony is devastating. In choosing the most natural solution, using your own hand, you've marked yourself as unnatural, unclean, and socially dangerous. Medieval society has created a system where the most basic human need becomes a source of permanent shame, where survival requires you to carry a secret that could destroy your social standing if discovered. The left-hand curse represents the ultimate contradiction of medieval life, a world that claims to value human dignity while systematically destroying it through impossible choices. You watch others in your community and wonder how many carry the same secret shame, how many have made the same desperate choice and now live with the same invisible contamination. The careful way some people eat, the way they keep one hand consistently hidden, the nervous glances when reaching for blessed objects, you begin to recognize the signs of others who have crossed the same line you have. The psychological impact transforms your relationship with your own body. Your left hand becomes a source of constant anxiety, a reminder of your failure to maintain the impossible standards of medieval cleanliness. You develop elaborate rituals to avoid using it, complex strategies for hiding its contamination, and a persistent fear that others will somehow discover your shameful secret through observation or accident. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the left-hand curse is how it creates a hierarchy of desperation within the already desperate medieval community. Those who can afford ceramics or wood look down on those forced to use their hands, creating layers of shame and judgment even among people who are all struggling with the same impossible choices. The curse becomes a tool of social control, a way of marking the truly desperate and separating them from those who can still maintain the illusion of cleanliness. The cultural power of this taboo is so strong that it survives the medieval period entirely, embedding itself in languages, customs, and social practices that persist into the modern era. The left-hand curse becomes one of medieval society's most enduring legacies, a reminder that some choices, once made, can never be undone, and some contaminations can never be cleansed. But if you think the left-hand curse represents the depths of medieval bathroom degradation, wait until you discover how even the wealthy and powerful couldn't escape this daily humiliation, and how nobility's supposed luxury solutions were just more elaborate forms of the same fundamental suffering. You stand in the guard robe of a great castle, surrounded by tapestries worth more than entire villages, yet the stench that assaults your nostrils is identical to that of the poorest peasant's latrine. This is the ultimate contradiction of medieval life. Even kings, queens, and the most powerful nobles in Europe could not escape the daily humiliation of medieval bathroom practices. Wealth could buy you golden chalices and silk robes, but it could not purchase dignity when nature called. The guard robe of nobility was certainly more elaborate than a peasant's outdoor pit, carved stone seats, decorative archways, perhaps even a window with a view of the castle grounds. But the fundamental reality remained unchanged. You still faced the same impossible choices: shared sponges, dangerous ceramics, wooden splinters, or the social death of using your left hand. No amount of gold could create toilet paper, no royal decree could eliminate the Tersorium, and no noble bloodline could protect you from the diseases that spread through communal waste management. You think about the modern world where wealth can indeed buy comfort, privacy, and superior hygiene products, where the rich live in a completely different reality from the poor when it comes to basic necessities. Here, in this brutal medieval hierarchy, the most intimate moments of human existence were great equalizers that reduced kings to the same degrading choices faced by their lowliest subjects. Even the most powerful rulers of medieval Europe, men who commanded armies, controlled vast territories, and claimed divine right to rule, had to navigate the same daily nightmare of cleaning themselves without dignity or safety. King Edward Roman III, one of England's most successful monarchs, used the same types of cleaning implements as the peasants who worked his fields. The Holy Roman Emperor faced the same risk of ceramic cuts and splinter infections as the serfs who paid him tribute. The psychological impact on the nobility was perhaps even more devastating than on common people, because they had further to fall. A peasant expected hardship and degradation as the natural order of things, but nobles were raised to believe in their inherent superiority, their divine right to comfort and privilege. Yet every trip to the guard robe reminded them that their bodies were just as base, just as vulnerable, just as subject to the same humiliating biological needs as everyone else. You watch as a great lord emerges from his guard robe, his face carefully composed to hide any trace of the degradation he's just endured, his expensive robes unable to mask the reality that he's just shared a sponge with his servants or risked injury from the same broken ceramics used by commoners. The elaborate rituals of court, the complex hierarchies of feudalism, the entire structure of medieval society, all of it crumbles in the face of basic human biology and the universal need to clean oneself after defecation. The irony extends beyond individual suffering to the very foundations of medieval power structures. Nobles justified their privilege by claiming divine appointment, superior breeding, and natural authority over lesser beings. Yet in the guard robe, these same nobles were reduced to the same animal desperation as their subjects, forced to make the same degrading choices, subject to the same diseases and injuries, united in the same fundamental human vulnerability. The medical consequences were equally democratic in their cruelty. Infection from a ceramic cut could kill a king just as easily as a peasant, and the medieval understanding of medicine was equally useless for both. The same parasites that infested the poor also crawled through the hair of archbishops and emperors. The same dysentery that killed commoners also claimed the lives of princes, who shared contaminated cleaning implements. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of noble suffering was how it was hidden, denied, and transformed into elaborate rituals designed to maintain the illusion of superiority. The guard robe became a theater where nobles performed their continued dignity even while enduring the same degradation as everyone else, creating an elaborate fiction that wealth and power could somehow transcend the basic realities of human biology. But if you think the shared suffering of nobility represents the depths of medieval bathroom equality, wait until you discover how the monastery system created its own special hell, where 40 constipated monks shared a 2-story nightmare that would challenge even the strongest faith in divine providence. You stand before the most humiliating architectural marvel in medieval Europe, a separate 2-story building at Muchelney Abbey in Somerset, specifically designed to accommodate the digestive disasters of 40 chronically constipated monks. This isn't just a bathroom, it's a monument to human suffering, a testament to what happens when you combine a medieval diet with the stress of monastic life and create a community-wide medical crisis. The structure looms before you like a medieval torture chamber disguised as a necessity. The upper floor connects to the lower through a system that would make modern sewage engineers weep with either admiration or revulsion, depending on their tolerance for human waste management on an industrial scale. You realize with growing dread that this building exists because the normal monastery facilities simply couldn't handle the scale of digestive dysfunction that plagued the religious community. The root of this crisis lies in the medieval monastic diet, a perfect storm of nutritional ignorance and religious restriction that turned basic digestion into a daily battle. Before 1336, when Pope Benedict Roman XII finally allowed clergy to eat 4-legged animals, the monks subsisted on a limited diet that would challenge even the strongest digestive system. Even after this papal permission, the fundamental problem remained. They ate only once a day, or twice in summer if they were fortunate, cramming an entire day's worth of food into massive portions. You think about the modern world, where fiber supplements, proper hydration, and regular meal timing solve most digestive issues, where constipation is an occasional inconvenience rather than a community-wide crisis requiring specialized architecture. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, your bowel movements become a matter of public concern, architectural planning, and communal suffering that binds 40 men together in the most degrading way imaginable. The medical remedies available to these suffering monks read like a catalogue of medieval torture disguised as healthcare. Various laxative recipes used fruit extracts that tasted like punishment and often made the problem worse. Other treatments included herbal concoctions that smelled like they'd already been through someone's digestive system. But perhaps most memorably, there was the treatment that involved a small piece of soap pressed and inserted rectally, a procedure that required the same courage others might reserve for battlefield surgery. You watch as Brother Marcus prepares for this soap insertion procedure with the grim determination of a man facing execution, his face pale with the knowledge of what's to come. The process requires not just physical courage, but psychological preparation for a level of medical intervention that would horrify any modern person. Yet this is considered standard treatment, a necessary evil in the daily battle against digestive dysfunction that defines monastic life. The psychological impact of this community-wide constipation crisis extends far beyond individual suffering. Your most private bodily functions become matters of public discussion, medical intervention, and architectural accommodation. The monastery's Circator, the night watchman, has among his official duties the deeply undignified task of waking up monks who have fallen asleep on the toilets exhausted from straining against their rebellious digestive systems. You witness this firsthand when Brother Augustine simply doesn't return from his evening constitutional. The Circator finds him slumped over, snoring softly, his body having given up the fight against both constipation and consciousness. The gentle shake, the whispered, "Brother, you must return to your cell." The embarrassed shuffle back to the dormitory. It becomes a nightly ritual that strips away any remaining dignity the monastic life might have promised. The irony is devastating. These men have dedicated their lives to spiritual elevation, to transcending the base needs of the flesh. Yet they're trapped in bodies that refuse to cooperate with their holy ambitions. The two-story privy building becomes a daily reminder that no amount of prayer, fasting, or spiritual discipline can overcome the fundamental realities of human biology and poor medieval nutrition. But if you think the community constipation crisis represents the depths of monastic degradation, wait until you discover what happens when the Circator's night duties extend beyond toilet rescues, to include surveillance of other ungodly mischief that desperate, exhausted monks might attempt under cover of darkness. You thought the daylight hours were challenging, but nothing could have prepared you for the unique horror of nighttime duties in the monastery. Tonight, you've been assigned to shadow Brother Marcus, the Circator, a position that sounds official and important until you discover what it actually entails. As the monastery settles into its supposed period of rest, you learn that someone must patrol the corridors, ensuring that no ungodly mischief takes place under cover of darkness. What you don't expect is that this noble-sounding duty includes some of the most undignified tasks imaginable. You begin your rounds at midnight, just after compline, when the great silence is supposed to descend upon the monastery. The corridors are pitch black except for the occasional guttering candle, and every footstep echoes off the stone walls like a judgment. Brother Marcus moves with the practiced stealth of someone who's been doing this job for years, his sandaled feet making barely a whisper against the cold floor. You try to match his silence, but your novice clumsiness seems amplified in the darkness. The first stop is the dormitory, where you peer through the gloom at rows of sleeping monks. Some snore peacefully, exhausted from their daily labors. Others toss and turn, muttering prayers or crying out from nightmares. A few scratch constantly at their lice-infested scalps, even in sleep. Brother Marcus checks each bed methodically, ensuring that no one has wandered off for unauthorized midnight activities. You wonder what kind of mischief could possibly tempt men who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Then you discover the answer, and it's far more mundane and humiliating than any spiritual transgression you might have imagined. Your next destination is the two-story privy building, where the real work of the Circator begins. The smell hits you before you even enter, a nauseating combination of human waste, damp stone, and the lingering effects of those medieval laxatives. That never quite worked as intended. This is where you learn that some of your fellow monks have developed the unfortunate habit of falling asleep on the toilets. Brother Marcus explains this phenomenon with the weary patience of someone who's dealt with it countless times. The combination of chronic constipation, exhaustion from the demanding monastic schedule, and the relative privacy of the privy creates the perfect conditions for monks to simply drift off. Some have been known to sleep for hours in these less than ideal circumstances, their bodies finally surrendering to fatigue even in the most uncomfortable positions imaginable. You watch in horrified fascination as Brother Marcus gently shakes Brother Augustine awake. The older monk startles, disoriented and embarrassed, mumbling apologies as he adjusts his habit and shuffles back toward the dormitory. This scene repeats itself twice more during your rounds. Grown men who have dedicated their lives to spiritual discipline, reduced to being roused from toilet-based slumber like children who have fallen asleep at their desks. The psychological impact of this duty is staggering. You realize that the Circator isn't just maintaining order. He's preserving what little dignity the monastic community has left. Without someone to wake these exhausted brothers, they might spend entire nights slumped over in the privy, vulnerable to both physical harm and profound humiliation. It's a job that requires both compassion and discretion, qualities that become essential when human dignity hangs by such a fragile thread. You think about the modern world where privacy is expected, and basic bodily functions don't require community supervision. Here, even your most private moments become subject to institutional oversight. The Circator's rounds represent the complete erosion of personal boundaries, the final surrender of individual autonomy to the collective needs of the monastery. There's nowhere to hide, no moment too intimate for potential intervention. As you continue your patrol, checking the scriptorium for monks who might be secretly working by candlelight, inspecting the kitchen for unauthorized midnight snacking, and ensuring that no one has wandered into areas where they shouldn't be, you begin to understand the true nature of monastic surveillance. This isn't just about preventing sin. It's about maintaining a system where every aspect of human behavior is monitored, controlled, and corrected. The night stretches on endlessly. Your feet grow numb from walking on cold stone, your eyes strain from peering into dark corners, and your stomach churns from the various odors you encounter. Brother Marcus moves through it all with mechanical efficiency, a man who's long since stopped being surprised by the ways human nature asserts itself even in the most controlled environments. But if you think the Circator's midnight rounds represent the most psychologically challenging aspect of monastery life, wait until you discover what happens when you're responsible for running a medieval hospital with nothing but herbs, prayers, and the crushing weight of watching people die while you stand helplessly by. You push open the heavy wooden door to St. Leonard's Hospital, and the smell hits you immediately, a nauseating mixture of unwashed bodies, festering wounds, herbal concoctions, and the unmistakable stench of approaching death. This is where you'll spend your days as the monastery's infirmarian, tending to the sick, the dying, and the desperate souls who arrive at your gates seeking miracles that medieval medicine simply cannot provide. Welcome to the intersection of faith and futility, where your job is to heal bodies with tools that barely qualify as medicine. Brother Wolfston, the current infirmarian, greets you with eyes that have seen too much suffering and hands stained permanently with the blood and bodily fluids of countless patients. He's been doing this job for over a decade, and you can see the toll it's taken, not just physically, but spiritually. How do you maintain faith in divine healing when you watch people die despite your best efforts? How do you reconcile the promise of God's mercy with the reality of human agony that no amount of prayer seems to alleviate? Your medical training consists of whatever herbal knowledge you've picked up in the monastery gardens, a collection of remedies passed down through generations of meaning but medically ignorant monks, and an unshakable belief that spiritual healing must come before physical treatment. The first rule of medieval medicine is that every patient must confess their sins before receiving any medical attention, because obviously, illness is a punishment for moral failings, and you can't cure the body until you've cleansed the soul. You watch as a pilgrim is carried in on a makeshift stretcher, burning with fever and delirious with pain. Brother Wolfston immediately begins the spiritual diagnosis. What sins has this man committed to deserve such suffering? Has he confessed properly? Is his soul prepared for either healing or death? Only after these theological questions are addressed does anyone bother to examine the actual symptoms, and by then, precious time has been lost that might have made a difference. Your medical arsenal is pathetically limited. You have witch hazel for inflammation, mint tisane to induce sweating, ground gemstones that supposedly have healing properties, and various herbal concoctions that taste terrible and accomplish little. For serious conditions, you might try bloodletting, because medieval medicine is convinced that most illnesses are caused by an imbalance of bodily humors that can be corrected by draining the patient's blood. The irony that this treatment often weakens patients further is lost on most practitioners. You think about the modern world, where antibiotics can cure infections that would be death sentences in your time. where pain medication can provide relief that you can only offer through prayer, where diagnostic tools can identify problems that you can only guess at. Here, you're essentially practicing medicine blindfolded, with one hand tied behind your back, while being expected to produce miracles through sheer force of faith. The psychological burden of this work is crushing. You sit by bedsides holding the hands of dying patients, offering comfort that feels increasingly hollow as you watch them slip away despite your best efforts. You pray desperately for divine intervention that rarely comes, and you begin to question whether your failures are due to insufficient faith, inadequate medical knowledge, or simply the cruel reality that some suffering cannot be alleviated by human means. Brother Wolfston tells you about the pilgrim who died last week, a soldier who'd been suffering from recurring fevers for 5 years, probably malaria contracted during military campaigns in France. You watched him deteriorate over several days, tried every remedy in your limited arsenal, prayed continuously for his recovery, and ultimately held his hand as he took his final breath. The helplessness you felt in that moment is something that haunts every medieval medical practitioner, the knowledge that you're essentially useless against most serious illnesses. The hospital becomes a theater of false hope and genuine despair. Families arrive expecting miracles, and you're forced to manage their expectations while maintaining your own sanity. Some patients do recover, usually those with minor ailments that would have healed on their own anyway, and these successes are celebrated as proof of divine intervention. But the failures, the deaths, the prolonged suffering that you can't alleviate, these weigh on your soul like stones. You learn to compartmentalize the grief, to focus on providing comfort rather than cures, to find meaning in easing suffering even when you can't eliminate it. But late at night, lying on your straw pallet after another day of medical futility, you wonder if this is really what God intended when He called you to serve others. Is bearing witness to suffering without being able to meaningfully address it really a form of holy work? Or is it just an elaborate exercise in learned helplessness? But if you think the medical helplessness of the hospital is the most psychologically devastating aspect of monastery life, wait until you discover what happens when you're forced to practice mortification of the flesh, deliberately inflicting pain on yourself as a path to spiritual enlightenment. You venture into the forest surrounding the monastery, driven by desperation and the knowledge that your other options, shared sponges, ceramic cuts, or wooden splinters, have already proven too dangerous or degrading to endure. The moss growing on the damp rocks and fallen logs seems like salvation compared to the horrors you've witnessed in the guard, robe. But you're about to discover that even nature's softest offerings come with their own special brand of medieval torture. The selection process becomes a deadly game of botanical Russian roulette. Not all moss is created equal, and your life may literally depend on choosing correctly. Some varieties are soft and absorbent, offering genuine relief from your predicament. Others harbor insects, parasites, or toxic substances that can turn your most intimate cleaning ritual into a medical emergency. You learn to examine each clump carefully, looking for signs of infestation, discoloration, or the telltale shimmer of moisture that might indicate dangerous mold or fungus. You think about the modern world, where toilet paper is manufactured under sterile conditions, tested for safety, and designed specifically for human use. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, you're gambling with whatever nature provides, hoping that your botanical knowledge is sufficient to distinguish between salvation and suffering. The irony isn't lost on you that in seeking to avoid the dangers of human-made cleaning implements, you've entered an even more unpredictable lottery where the stakes are infection, poisoning, or parasitic infestation. The geographic lottery adds another layer of complexity to your survival. In the damp forests of northern Europe, moss grows abundantly, offering at least the illusion of choice. But in drier climates, or during harsh winters when moss becomes scarce, you face the terrifying prospect of having no natural options at all. Some monks have been forced to travel miles from their monasteries just to find suitable moss. turning a basic human need into an expedition fraught with danger and exposure. The seasonal variations create their own special hell. Spring moss might be contaminated with animal waste from creatures emerging from winter hibernation. Summer moss could be crawling with insects or dried to the point of uselessness. Autumn moss might be rotting beneath fallen leaves, harboring dangerous bacteria. Winter moss, if you can find it at all, might be frozen solid or buried under snow that you'll have to melt with your own body heat. You discover that even the safest moss comes with hidden dangers. What appears clean and soft might be home to tiny mites that burrow into your skin, causing weeks of itching and inflammation. Other varieties might contain natural irritants that cause chemical burns on sensitive tissue. Some moss harbors parasitic worms that can enter your body through the smallest abrasion, leading to internal infestations that medieval medicine has no power to treat. This psychological impact of this botanical gambling extends far beyond the immediate physical risks. Every trip to gather moss becomes an exercise in terror, where you must weigh the relative dangers of different natural options against the certainty of degradation from human-made alternatives. You develop an intimate knowledge of forest ecosystems not out of scholarly interest, but out of desperate necessity for survival. The community aspect of moss gathering creates its own social dynamics within the monastery. Monks share information about the best gathering spots, warn each other about dangerous varieties, and sometimes compete for access to the safest, softest specimens. The forest becomes an extension of the monastery's social hierarchy, where knowledge of moss varieties translates into slightly less suffering during your most vulnerable moments. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of moss roulette is how it transforms your relationship with the natural world. What should be a source of beauty and spiritual contemplation becomes a catalogue of potential threats and desperate calculations. Every walk in the forest becomes a scouting mission for cleaning materials, every patch of moss a potential lifeline or death trap. But if you think the dangers of moss roulette represent the ultimate in medieval bathroom horror, wait until you discover what happens when winter arrives and your only option becomes snow-frozen water that can cause frostbite in places where frostbite should never occur. You stand at the edge of the monastery grounds in the depths of winter, the bitter wind cutting through your thin habit like knives, and you realize with growing desperation that all your usual options have vanished. The moss is buried under 3 feet of snow, the leaves have long since rotted away, and even the dangerous ceramics and wooden sticks are frozen solid in the guard robe. Your body's needs haven't stopped for the season, but nature has conspired to make your daily cleaning ritual even more nightmarish than usual. The snow around you looks deceptively pure and clean, almost inviting compared to the horrors you've endured with shared sponges and ceramic cuts. But you're about to discover that winter brings its own special brand of medieval torture. The irony isn't lost on you that in seeking cleanliness, you risk losing fingers, toes, or worse to the merciless cold. You think about the modern world, where heated bathrooms and warm water are taken for granted, where winter means turning up the thermostat rather than facing the choice between hygiene and hypothermia. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, even the seasons conspire against your basic human dignity. The process of using snow for cleaning requires a level of courage that borders on madness. You must first gather handfuls of the frozen precipitation, feeling it burn your skin even through the brief contact. Then comes the truly horrifying part, applying this ice, cold substance to the most sensitive areas of your body, knowing that prolonged contact could cause permanent damage. The medical consequences are immediate and severe. The shock of frozen snow against warm skin causes an agony so intense that many monks have been known to cry out, breaking the sacred silence and earning additional punishment for their weakness. The risk of frostbite is real and constant. You've seen brothers who have lost feeling in their extremities, their skin turning black and eventually falling off. You watch as Brother Augustine attempts this frozen ritual. his face contorted in agony as he forces himself to endure what can only be described as voluntary torture. The steam that rises from the contact between snow and body heat creates an almost supernatural effect, as if his very life force is being drained away by the cold. His hands shake uncontrollably, not just from the temperature, but from the psychological trauma. The geographical lottery becomes even more cruel in winter. Monks in northern climates face months of this frozen hell, while their southern counterparts might only endure weeks. But even in milder regions, winter nights can bring temperatures that turn snow into a weapon against human dignity. The monastery becomes a prison where the walls are made not just of stone, but of ice and wind. The psychological impact extends far beyond the immediate physical pain. You learn to dread not just the call of nature, but the approach of winter itself. The changing seasons become a countdown to months of torture, where every trip to relieve yourself becomes a battle against the elements that could easily claim your life. The simple act of maintaining hygiene transforms into an exercise in survival. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of winter's frozen hell is how it reveals the true powerlessness of medieval life. No amount of prayer, no degree of faith, no level of devotion can change the fundamental reality that you must choose between cleanliness and survival. The monastery's promise of spiritual transcendence crumbles in the face of frozen snow and the basic biological needs that won't wait for spring. The community aspect of winter suffering creates its own bonds of shared misery. You huddle together with your fellow monks, sharing techniques for minimizing frostbite risk, warning each other about the dangers of prolonged exposure, and sometimes simply holding each other for warmth after particularly brutal cleaning sessions. The winter becomes a test not just of individual endurance, but of collective survival. But if you think winter as frozen torture represents the ultimate in seasonal suffering, wait until you discover what happens when the wealthy and powerful attempt to create luxury solutions that are just more elaborate forms of the same fundamental degradation. You stand in the private chamber of a wealthy abbey, surrounded by tapestries and golden chalices that represent more wealth than entire villages will see in a lifetime. Yet the reality of your daily bathroom ritual remains fundamentally unchanged. The nobility and wealthy monks have access to what they consider the ultimate luxury in medieval hygiene: linen cloths, carefully woven, supposedly clean, and reusable for their most intimate cleaning needs. But you're about to discover that even this luxury is just a more elaborate form of the same degrading suffering that defines medieval existence. The linen cloths hang before you like banners of false hope, each one representing a small fortune in medieval currency. These aren't the rough, scratchy fabrics used by common people, but fine linen imported from distant lands, woven by skilled craftsmen, and treated with expensive oils and herbs to make them supposedly suitable for the most delicate tasks. Yet, as you reach for one of these precious cloths, you realize that wealth can buy you softer materials. But it cannot buy you dignity, cleanliness, or freedom from the fundamental horrors of medieval hygiene. You think about the modern world, where disposable products are taken for granted, where the wealthy can indeed purchase superior hygiene solutions that are genuinely better, safer, and more comfortable. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, even the richest nobles and most powerful abbots are trapped in the same cycle of degradation, just with more expensive tools for their suffering. The process of using these luxury linen cloths reveals the hollow nature of medieval wealth. Each cloth must be carefully examined for wear, tears, or stains that might cause injury or infection. The clean cloths often bear the faint odors and discolorations of previous uses, despite multiple washings in harsh lye soap that damages the fabric and leaves chemical residues that burn sensitive skin. The irony isn't lost on you that these expensive cleaning tools are themselves sources of contamination. The washing and reuse cycle creates its own special hell for the wealthy. Servants must collect the soiled linen cloths, wash them in scalding water with caustic soap, and somehow restore them to a condition deemed suitable for their master's most intimate needs, the psychological burden extends beyond the users to include those forced to handle, clean, and maintain these instruments of disguised degradation. Even wealth cannot eliminate the human cost of medieval hygiene. It simply redistributes the suffering. You watch as Abbot Thomas de Moulton prepares for his daily ritual with these luxury cloths, his face betraying none of the revulsion he must feel at using fabric that has been used for the same purpose countless times before. The elaborate ceremony he creates around this simple act, the careful selection, the ritualistic handling, the solemn disposal, reveals the desperate need to transform degradation into dignity through sheer force of will and expensive materials. The medical consequences remain unchanged despite the luxury materials. Linen cloths can still harbor bacteria, parasites, and infections just as effectively as any other medieval cleaning implement. The repeated washing with harsh chemicals often makes the fabric more abrasive than when it was new, causing microscopic cuts and irritations that provide entry points for disease. The wealthy suffer from the same infections, parasites, and medical complications as the poor. They just suffer with more expensive tools. The social dynamics surrounding linen cloth usage create their own hierarchies of humiliation. The quality of your linen, the frequency of replacement, and the skill of your servants in maintaining them become markers of status within the already privileged class. Competition emerges over who can afford the finest cloths, the most frequent washing, the most elaborate storage systems, turning even this basic human need into a display of wealth and power. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the linen luxury is how it creates the illusion of civilization while perpetuating the same fundamental barbarism. The wealthy convince themselves that their expensive cloths represent progress, refinement, and superiority over the common people, when in reality they're simply using more costly versions of the same inadequate, degrading, and potentially dangerous cleaning methods that define medieval life. The psychological impact extends beyond individual suffering to encompass the entire social structure. The wealthy must maintain the fiction that their linen cloths represent genuine luxury and improvement, while secretly knowing that they're still trapped in the same cycle of degradation as everyone else. This cognitive dissonance creates its own form of mental torture, where the privileged must constantly rationalize their continued suffering while maintaining their supposed superiority. You stand in the infirmary of St. Mary's Abbey, watching Brother Wolfston tend to yet another pilgrim burning with fever, and you begin to understand the horrifying truth that medieval medicine refuses to acknowledge. The very cleaning methods you've been forced to endure are not just degrading and painful, they're actively spreading the diseases that are killing people by the thousands. The Black Death that swept through Europe in the 14th century didn't just happen by accident. It thrived in a world where shared sponges, contaminated water, and complete ignorance of hygiene created the perfect conditions for epidemic disease. The irony is devastating beyond comprehension. Every time you use that communal Tersorium, every time you share cleaning water with dozens of other people, every time you're forced to clean yourself with contaminated moss or reused linen cloths, you're participating in a system of disease transmission that would horrify any modern epidemiologist. The very practices designed to maintain cleanliness are actually spreading death from person to person, monastery to monastery, across the entire continent. You think about the modern world, where the connection between hygiene and disease is understood and acted upon, where hand sanitizer and proper sanitation have virtually eliminated many infectious diseases. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, the opposite is true. The more you try to stay clean using medieval methods, the more likely you are to contract and spread the very diseases that are decimating the population. The medical evidence is overwhelming, even if medieval physicians refuse to see it. Dysentery spreads through communities that share toilet facilities and cleaning implements. Parasitic worms pass from person to person through contaminated water and shared sponges. Bacterial infections flourish in the wounds caused by ceramic cuts and wooden splinters, then spread through contact with contaminated cleaning materials. The monastery, which should be a place of healing and sanctuary, becomes a breeding ground for epidemic disease. You watch as Brother Wolfston examines a patient suffering from what he calls camp fever, probably typhus or another disease spread through poor sanitation and parasitic insects. The pilgrim's symptoms are identical to those you've seen in dozens of other patients: fever, weakness, delirium, and the telltale signs of a body overwhelmed by infection. Yet Brother Wolfston continues to treat him with the same contaminated tools, the same shared water, the same cleaning methods that probably gave him the disease in the first place. The Black Death that arrived in Europe in 1347 found the perfect environment for its spread. A population that shared bodily waste through communal cleaning implements, lived in close quarters with poor ventilation, and had no understanding of how disease actually spreads. The very practices that were supposed to maintain spiritual purity created the conditions for physical corruption on a scale that nearly destroyed European civilization. You realize that the monastery's emphasis on shared suffering and communal living, combined with medieval ignorance about disease transmission, has created a perfect storm of medical catastrophe. The same Tersorium that 40 monks use daily becomes a vector for spreading intestinal parasites, bacterial infections, and viral diseases throughout the community. The shared washing facilities become breeding grounds for pathogens that jump from person to person with terrifying efficiency. The psychological impact extends beyond individual suffering to encompass an entire civilization's relationship with cleanliness and disease. Medieval people develop elaborate theological explanations for epidemic disease, God's wrath, moral failings, astrological influences, because they cannot comprehend the simple truth that their own hygiene practices are killing them. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They pray for protection from disease while actively participating in its spread. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this toilet plague connection is how it reveals the fundamental powerlessness of medieval life. No amount of prayer, no degree of faith, no level of devotion can protect you from diseases that spread through the very practices your society considers necessary for spiritual and physical cleanliness. You're trapped in a system that guarantees suffering and death while claiming to offer salvation and health. The monastery becomes a microcosm of medieval Europe's relationship with disease. A place where good intentions, religious devotion, and complete medical ignorance combine to create conditions that would be considered biological warfare in any other context. Every day you survive in this environment is a testament to human endurance, but also a reminder of how ignorance can turn even the most basic human needs into instruments of mass destruction. But if you think the disease, spreading horror of medieval hygiene represents the ultimate failure of the system, wait until you discover how the people tasked with cleaning up this mess, the latrine emptiers, faced dangers that made death by disease seem like a merciful alternative. You stand at the edge of the cesspit behind the monastery, watching as the most despised and dangerous workers in medieval society prepare for their daily descent into literal hell. These are the latrine emptiers, the gong farmers, the men whose job it is to clean out the accumulated waste of entire communities, and you're about to discover that in a world full of degrading occupations, this represents the absolute bottom of human existence, where survival means wading through death itself for wages that barely keep you alive. The smell hits you first, a nauseating wall of human waste, rotting organic matter, and toxic gases. The smell hits you first, a nauseating wall of human waste, rotting organic matter, and toxic gases that have been fermenting in underground pits for months or even years. But the latrine emptiers don't have the luxury of turning away. This is their workplace, their source of income, their daily reality. You watch as they lower themselves into pits filled with the accumulated excrement of hundreds of people, armed with nothing but crude shovels, buckets, and the desperate courage of men who have no other choice. You think about the modern world, where waste management is handled by machines, protective equipment, and sophisticated treatment systems. You think about the modern world, where waste management is handled by machines, protective equipment, and sophisticated treatment systems that keep workers safe from the diseases and dangers of human waste. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, these men face death every single day, not from warfare or accident, but from the simple act of trying to make a living in the most hazardous profession imaginable. The physical dangers are immediate and constant. The toxic gases that build up in cesspits can kill within minutes. Hydrogen sulfide, methane, and ammonia create a lethal cocktail that has claimed countless lives. You've heard stories of latrine emptiers who simply collapsed and died while working, their bodies overcome by fumes that their medieval understanding of chemistry cannot explain or prevent. Others have drowned in the liquid waste, their bodies discovered days later when the smell becomes too overwhelming even for a profession built around stench. The medical consequences extend far beyond the immediate dangers of toxic gas and drowning. These workers are exposed to every disease known to medieval Europe, concentrated and amplified in the festering waste they handle daily. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, parasitic worms, and countless other infections spread through direct contact with human excrement. The latrine emptiers become walking disease vectors, carrying death from house to house, community to community, often dying themselves before they can spread their infections to others. You watch as Master Geoffrey, a veteran gong farmer who somehow survived 15 years in this profession, instructs a new worker on the techniques of survival. Breathe through your mouth, never your nose, he advises. Move quickly but carefully, the gases can drop you in seconds, and never, ever touch your face or mouth until you've washed in the river. The irony isn't lost on you that the river they use for washing is the same one that receives the waste from upstream communities. The social stigma attached to this profession creates its own special hell. Latrine emptiers are forbidden from living within city walls, banned from most taverns and markets, and shunned by even the poorest members of society. Their children inherit not just poverty, but the permanent stain of their father's occupation. Marriage prospects are non-existent, social mobility impossible, and the cycle of degradation continues from generation to generation. The economic exploitation is perhaps the most cruel aspect of this profession. Despite the extreme dangers and social costs, latrine emptiers are paid barely enough to survive. The wealthy who employ them treat them as less than human, disposable workers whose deaths are considered acceptable losses in the maintenance of urban sanitation. When a gong farmer dies on the job, he's simply replaced by another desperate man with no other options. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the latrine emptier's existence is how it reveals the fundamental hypocrisy of medieval society. The same people who create elaborate theological justifications for social hierarchy, who claim that poverty is God's will and that the poor deserve their fate, depend entirely on these workers to maintain the basic sanitation that makes urban life possible. Without the latrine emptiers, the cities would drown in their own waste within weeks. The psychological toll on these workers is devastating beyond imagination. You watch Master Geoffrey's face as he prepares for another descent into the pit, and you see the hollow resignation of a man who's accepted that his life has no value beyond his willingness to do what others won't. The constant exposure to death, disease, and social rejection creates a form of living hell that challenges the very concept of human dignity. But if you think the professional degradation of latrine emptiers represents the ultimate failure of medieval society, wait until you discover how entire cities became open sewers. But if you think the professional degradation of latrine emptiers represents the ultimate failure of medieval society, wait until you discover how entire cities became open sewers, turning the streets themselves into rivers of human waste that made every citizen a participant in this nightmare. You step out of the monastery gates into the bustling streets of medieval London, and the assault on your senses is immediate and overwhelming. What you thought was the ultimate degradation of monastic bathroom practices pales in comparison to the urban nightmare that greets you entire city streets that have become open sewers, where human waste flows freely through the same paths where people walk, work, and try to live their daily lives. Welcome to the medieval city, where the distinction between street and toilet has been completely erased. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with a mixture of human excrement, animal waste, rotting food, and the accumulated filth of thousands of people who have no choice but to dispose of their waste wherever they happen to be. The smell is beyond description, a nauseating cocktail of decay, disease, and desperation that clings to your clothes, your hair, and your very soul. You realize with growing horror that this isn't an accident or a temporary problem. This is how medieval cities are designed to function. You think about the modern world, where urban planning includes sophisticated sewage systems, waste treatment facilities, and strict regulations about public sanitation. Here, in this brutal medieval reality, the city itself has become one giant toilet, where the waste of hundreds of thousands of people flows through the same streets where children play, merchants sell food, and families try to build lives. The system, if it can be called that, is both simple and horrifying. People simply throw their waste out of windows, dump chamber pots into the streets, and relieve themselves wherever convenient. The rain is supposed to wash it all away, but medieval cities are poorly designed for drainage, creating stagnant pools of human waste that become breeding grounds for disease and death. The wealthy areas might have slightly better drainage, but even the richest neighborhoods cannot escape the fundamental reality of medieval urban waste management. You watch as a merchant tries to navigate the street while avoiding the worst of the flowing sewage, his expensive boots already stained with substances you don't want to identify. A mother hurries past with her children, lifting them over particularly deep puddles of waste while trying to breathe through a cloth held over her nose. The irony isn't lost on you that these people are trying to conduct normal business, normal life, in conditions that would be considered uninhabitable by any modern standard. The economic impact of this urban sewage nightmare extends far beyond simple discomfort. Merchants lose goods to contamination, workers become sick and unable to labor, and entire districts become uninhabitable during certain seasons when the waste accumulates faster than it can be washed away. The cities attempt to function as a center of commerce and civilization is constantly undermined by its complete failure to manage the most basic human need. You discover that even attempts at improvement often make things worse. Some cities have tried to create rudimentary drainage systems, but these quickly become clogged with waste and debris, creating backup systems that flood entire neighborhoods with sewage. The maintenance of these systems requires workers willing to wade through human waste, the same latrine emptiers whose dangerous profession you witnessed at the monastery, now working on an urban scale that multiplies the dangers exponentially. The social hierarchy becomes visible through waste management. The wealthy live on higher ground where gravity helps carry waste away from their homes, while the poor are trapped in low, lying areas where sewage accumulates and stagnates. The rich can afford to pay servants to carry their waste further from their homes, while the poor must simply dump it wherever they can. Even in waste disposal, medieval society creates systems that ensure the suffering falls most heavily on those least able to bear it. The psychological impact on urban dwellers is devastating. You watch people who have learned to navigate their daily lives around rivers of human waste, who have developed elaborate mental strategies for ignoring the smell, the sight, and the constant threat of disease that surrounds them. Children grow up thinking this is normal, that cities are supposed to smell like sewers, that walking through human waste is just part of urban life. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these street sewers is how they reveal the complete failure of medieval civilization to solve basic human problems. These are the same cities that build magnificent cathedrals, create complex legal systems, and develop sophisticated trade networks, yet they cannot figure out how to prevent their streets from becoming rivers of human excrement. But if you think the urban sewage nightmare represents the ultimate failure of medieval society, wait until you discover how this systematic degradation created a form of community where people found meaning and connection through their shared suffering, and how endurance became not just survival, but a form of faith. You kneel in the chapel one final time as the bell tolls for compline, and you realize with a mixture of horror and acceptance that you can no longer remember what it felt like to want anything for yourself. The person who entered this world of medieval bathroom degradation with expectations of basic dignity, privacy, and cleanliness has been so thoroughly transformed that even the memory of those standards feels like a story about someone else. You've achieved what medieval society considers perfect adaptation. the complete acceptance of conditions that would break most modern people within hours. The monastery has succeeded beyond its wildest ambitions. You don't just endure the shared sponges, you're grateful for them. You don't just accept the ceramic cuts and wooden splinters. You've learned to minimize the damage with techniques passed down through generations of suffering. You don't just tolerate the left hand taboo, you've internalized it so completely that using your right hand for anything feels natural and proper. When you're forced to use snow for cleaning in winter, you thank God for the opportunity to prove your endurance. You think about the modern world, where such complete psychological adaptation would be recognized as the result of systematic conditioning, where the deliberate destruction of basic human standards would be considered a form of psychological warfare. But those thoughts feel distant and academic, like studying the customs of a foreign culture that has nothing to do with your reality. You've been so thoroughly conditioned that you can no longer conceive of alternatives, can no longer imagine wanting to be anywhere else or anyone else. The other monks move around you like fellow survivors of some cosmic shipwreck, each one as thoroughly adapted as you are. Brother Marcus, who's been here for 30 years, has achieved a kind of mechanical perfection that's both inspiring and terrifying. He uses the Tersorium without flinching, handles ceramic shards with practiced skill, and speaks of winter snow cleaning as if it were a normal part of human existence. You aspire to his level of complete acceptance, his total surrender to the system. You realize that what medieval society calls finding dignity in suffering is actually the process of losing yourself so completely that there's nothing left but an empty vessel ready to be filled with institutional purpose. The spiritual journey isn't about becoming a better person. It's about ceasing to be a person at all. You've found peace, but it's the peace of the completely defeated, the utterly compliant, the perfectly broken. The daily routine that once felt like torture now feels like the natural rhythm of existence. You wake not because you have to, but because you can't imagine doing anything else. You use whatever cleaning implements are available, not because you're forced to, but because the idea of having preferences has simply ceased to exist. You endure pain, degradation, and humiliation, not because you fear punishment, but because the concept of having your own will has simply withered away from disuse. You understand now that endurance isn't just about surviving hardship. It's about being transformed by it so completely that you become something else entirely. Medieval society doesn't just test your ability to endure suffering. It uses that suffering to reshape you at the most fundamental level, to rewire your brain, to reconstruct your very understanding of what it means to exist as a human being. As you file out of the chapel after compline, moving in perfect silence through corridors you could navigate blindfolded, you feel a profound sense of completion. Not the completion of a journey towards something better, but the completion of a process of systematic destruction and reconstruction. You've been broken down and rebuilt according to specifications that prioritize institutional needs over individual humanity. The monastery walls no longer feel like a prison because you no longer remember what freedom felt like. They don't feel like a sanctuary because you no longer need protection from a world you can barely remember. They simply feel like the natural boundaries of existence, the only reality you can conceive of, the only life you can imagine wanting. You drift off to sleep on your straw pallet, not to dreams of escape or memories of your former life, but to the dreamless sleep of someone who has achieved what medieval society considers the highest spiritual state. The complete absence of self, the total surrender of will, the perfect transformation from human being into institutional instrument. You've found meaning in suffering by allowing suffering to erase everything that once made you capable of meaning anything at all. Tomorrow will bring another day of shared sponges, ceramic cuts, and winter snow, but it won't feel like endurance anymore. It will feel like the natural order of things, the only way life could possibly be, the inevitable result of a process that has transformed you from someone who suffered into someone who exists only to serve the system that destroyed and remade you.